everyone, welcome to today's video. Last time you saw me washing all that yarn, or at least an abbreviated version of that. And now comes time for the ultimate test, which is winding the yarn back up and seeing how it's going to handle it. Yeah, so I have a little handy dandy setup in the living room where I can actually show you guys how I wind up the yarn now, which is a little bit different than how I used to wind it up in the past because I got some new gadgets. Well, I've had them for several months at this point, but they are relatively new to me in how I deal with yarn. But I also know there's a couple skeins of yarn in there that are not going to be able to handle the winding well. I know there was one that's just literally metal mesh. I think I'm going to leave that one alone until I feel called to use it again. There's also the one with the pom-poms, and I don't think that's going to handle the yarn winder very well. You'll see why in a moment. But I think the rest could probably handle being in the yarn winder. So let me rearrange the setup and then I can show you how I'm going to wind the yarn. And then I'm going to film myself winding the rest in my usual time-lapsey sort of way. Alright, so this is the yarn that's dry. Not all the yarn is dry yet. Most of it's still downstairs actually. I just did some rearranging so that way it's easier for it to happen. But here's the two-part of my yarn winding set. So this is my Swift, which is where I'm going to put the skein of yarn on. And then this is my yarn winder right here. So this is how I'm going to wind it into a cake. So that way I can use a center pull if I want to. Although I'm finding out I'm still preferring the outer pull because the yarn collapsing is a little bit more manageable when you're pulling from the outside than the inside. This is the one that I'm probably not going to be winding into a cake. This was the one that I mentioned from earlier. Here's how I'm going to start this. So you can see I have it in a hank like this, and this is why I put it in the hank. So I can easily do this. So I usually deal with the Swift first, and I usually leave this loose. So what I'm first going to do is I'm first going to pull part of the Swift out. Just enough so that way when I want it to expand it's more likely to do so. And then I'm going to take the hank and I'm going to put it around just like that. And then I'm going to take this part up here and I'm just going to push it up until it's wide enough. And then I'm going to screw this in tight. Now from here, all these scrap yarns, so I found my edge, that's good. Usually you have to find your edge when you do these things, so that way it's easier to manage. But I'm also just going to cut all my scrap yarn, and that's why I had them in a different color. Partly because of the washing process, and partly because I knew it would be easier to find when it came time to do this step. So I know once I get 4 of them, I will have taken all of them off. And I'm not going to throw these away. I'm just going to add them to my ever-evolving yarn scrap pile, in which I will use it to stuff into some sort of amigurumi or pillow or whatnot. Yeah. I don't really have to worry about anything being on the chair, although I am going to move these to the other chair. But now you can see I have a bunch of stuffed animals here. They're fine there. It's not going to matter. They're my cheering section. And then I've got my little end of the yarn right here. And you can see I have my yarn winder here. There's this little metal bit right here. I'm going to feed it through the little metal bit right here. That's how I'm going to keep tension. And then on the top of this here, it's going to have a little notch. So often I'll just do like a little slip knot just to make sure that it stays there. And then I just spin. And I just go until the entire thing finishes up. And it usually takes about 2 minutes. Can you hear the wood going on the Swift there? This does get a little bit noisy, so usually if I'm going to do this while watching TV, which is why this is set up in the living room, I'll usually use something that I've already watched several times, so that way if I miss the words, I'm not too bummed out. It's starting to turn up a bit nicely. There, you can see it's going to start to rise as it happens. Yeah, that's okay when it happens like that. And then with this, you can kind of just tuck the outer end under the little bit. If you got a little paper that goes with the skein, you can usually like fold it in and put it inside this part, so that way the yarn kind of swallows it up as it comes off, but you just pull it off and you've got a cake. I don't know how well these yarns are going to cake up, quite honestly. I feel like the expanding thing's going to happen more with wool, and this is more acrylic yarn, which isn't going to really expand like that, or like polyester or basically synthetic yarns, yeah. At this point now, I'm going to switch to the time-lapsing part of the video. since I used like the same knitting knotty to wind them all the hanks were relatively around the same length, which means I didn't have to adjust this too much. I just had to constantly keep adjusting them because it took so many trips just to get them all wound up because they all dried at varying rates. About half of them I did end up attacking with a hairdryer because they were mostly dry except for that one little bit on the bottom that just would not dry. And it was like, I'm tired of waiting. I'll insert a little clip of it here. There was one, even so, that I didn't attack with the hairdryer that I probably wound a little bit too soon, which was this one. This one still feels wet. It also smells. I don't know if it's a good smell or if it's a bad smell or who knows, right? And then some of these, because like if it was wool, it would have just bounced back into shape, but some of them, like the cottons, they're like donuts. There were a couple that I didn't wind, so like the metal one that I held up earlier, but I mean, I'm not going to put this one through the winder. It didn't like getting frogged, so I know it wasn't going to like going through this little metal part through the cake. Especially after this guy didn't like it. Ooh. This guy kept stopping every time I came to a knot. It's like, okay, let's undo it and redo it. Let's undo it and redo it. I also didn't do it with this one because of the pom-poms. Although the pom-poms seem to have regained their fluff after being completely wet. I was afraid that I made something wet that was supposed to be dry clean. That still might have been the case, but it seems to have regained some of the poofiness, which is good. Well, not that guy that I'm holding, but like this guy right here, yeah. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep this yarn separate from the rest of my yarn, simply because it's older. It's not new yarn. I don't want to include it in a project accidentally, because I will include it in a project accidentally if I don't keep it separate. Yeah, that was the process of winding the yarn. Also, I realized when I was explaining how to do this, I was showing how to thread it through like that. But what I actually ended up doing was, you can see how it's not completely like capped off anywhere, so I often just wound it around like that. And that was good for a lot of the thicker yarns too. Anyway, that was today's entertainment. Have a nice day.